I can still see that day as clear as if it were yesterday, the day I left my hometown for good. The crisp autumn air carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the world felt strangely quiet. I loaded everything that mattered into my beat-up old pickup truck, ready to leave behind the pain and start anew. Walking away wasn't easy, but I had no choice. Lies and betrayal had torn my life apart, and the only way to heal was to put miles between me and the people who caused it. After driving for what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small, sleepy town that seemed frozen in time. The locals were warm and welcoming, the pace of life was slow, and the town itself had a charm that instantly drew me in. While exploring, I found an old gas station and garage, sitting empty and forgotten after years on the market. I could see the potential in it right away, so I made a lowball offer. To my surprise, the owner accepted, and just like that, I had the foundation for rebuilding my life and starting a business. A few months later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting at my favorite little tavern, soaking in the peace of my new life. That tavern had become my refuge not long after I'd moved here. Buying the gas station and repair shop turned out to be a smart move. The previous owner was desperate to sell after it sat empty for 2 long years, and I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to start over. The first thing I did was invest in the place. I built a retail store facing the gas station to provide the town with essentials, especially since the only grocery store closed early every evening. I rearranged the fuel tanks so the pumps were easy to see from the store, which also opened up space for more parking. The store quickly became a hotspot, especially from 7 p.m. to midnight, and stayed open around the clock. As for the garage, I kept it running 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., with Saturdays reserved for special projects. At first, the local bar owners weren't too happy about me selling basic liquor at the store, but over time, it turned out to be a win-win. The extra sales brought in steady income, and the jobs it created helped the community. Business took off after I hired a sharp-minded woman to help reorganize the store's layout. Within no time, we paid off the equity loan and even had to double the staff to meet the growing demand. On Friday and Saturday nights, the store was buzzing with bargoers buying snacks, and Sundays were all about cold beer at reasonable prices. One evening, as I nursed a double shot of Jack Daniels with a slice of lemon, I thought about the old truck I just finished working on. It had taken me 8 months to track down the right part and make a few custom modifications. The truck had been in the same family since the 1940s, and its owner had no intention of letting it go. He used to joke that when his time came, he'd rather be buried in that truck than anywhere else. Evenings at the bar were best between 4 and 7 p.m. That's when the regulars came in, most of them already finished with dinner. Later on, the place would fill up with a livelier crowd. Farmers would show up with their daughters, looking to relax after a long day of work. Over the 6.5 years I'd lived here, I'd built a good reputation for myself. Folks around town looked out for one another, and they always kept me in the loop if something unusual was going on. I made it a habit to visit the bar every Saturday evening for a quiet drink before heading home. It was my time to unwind and gather my thoughts. But on this particular evening, my peace was shattered. As soon as they walked in, I wished I could disappear. They ruined what had been a perfectly good day. The woman was none other than my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man standing beside her was someone I had once thought of as my son. Seeing them stirred up memories I tried so hard to bury. It hit me then, you can't always recognize evil when you're living in the middle of it. The boy had grown into a man, and the resemblance to his real father was undeniable. It only served to confirm the truth I'd uncovered years ago, the same truth that had ripped my world apart. But why were they looking for me now? I watched as they talked briefly with the bartender, handed him a photo, and then walked out. I silently thanked my scruffy appearance. Long, unkempt hair paired with a beard and mustache, along with the weight I'd lost. It made me look different enough that they didn't spot me. The note they left was short and direct. Come home. About 30 minutes later, The bartender strolled over to my table and sat down. "What were they after, Tom?" I asked. "They said they'd heard a rumor you might be here and wanted to confirm it," Tom said. "Their message was that a woman named Willa is dying of cancer and wants to make amends. I pretended not to recognize your name and didn't confirm anything." "Who are they, and what are they really after?" I asked, lighting up a cigarette after tearing off the filter. Tom sighed. "The woman's your ex-wife's twin sister, and the guy is the son your ex passed off as yours for years. Honestly, from how they acted, I'd say they're partly truthful. But there's something else they're keeping back." I nodded, trying to process what he'd said. My ex-wife, Willa, and her twin sister, Tammy, had always been masters of manipulation. They could appear as sweet as angels while plotting your downfall behind your back. Tom returned to the bar, and my thoughts drifted back almost 7 years to the day I walked away, vowing not to come back for at least another 7 years. I could still hear their laughter, mocking me as though I was the fool. That day, they learned I wasn't joking. They never saw me again or heard directly from me. They didn't understand how deeply they'd hurt me, nor did they take me seriously. They thought my reaction was nothing more than anger over their cruel games. What they didn't know was that just weeks earlier, I'd uncovered the devastating truth. Our youngest child wasn't mine but my brother-in-law's. That revelation had set everything in motion. A relative who'd seen Willa and Tammy's behavior over the years confirmed what I already suspected. She called them black witches, accusing them of practicing pure deceit and selfishness. Earlier that same week, we discovered Willa had taken out a $4 million life insurance policy on me, complete with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. A wise old woman I trusted urged me to leave before it was too late. By the time I left, my work truck was already packed with everything I cared about from 16 years of marriage. Without a backward glance, I drove away and didn't stop until I was 2 states away. Some of it, I'll admit, was my fault. Willa and I had gotten together when she was just 16 and I was 18. After she became pregnant, my family pushed me to marry her. Over the years, we had 2 more kids. To Willa, it was all a big joke. She told our daughters, "Your dad will come back once he's calmed down. He just needs to find his sense of humor again." But instead of me returning, a sheriff showed up at her door a few hours later. "Are you Mrs. Willa Harper?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," she replied. "Well, ma'am, you've been served," the officer said, handing her an envelope. Willa laughed, assuming it was some kind of prank. But when she opened the papers, she realized it was anything but a joke. I had legally ended our marriage without a second thought. The family matriarch, known as the Grand Dame, later told me she was shocked at the thoroughness of the divorce petition. My lawyer had included a detailed list of assets, receipts, and even DNA results that proved Willa's year-long affair. Among the documents was a letter stating I was suing her lover, her own sister's husband, for child support, infidelity, and defamation. The tables had turned, and their laughter died that day. For years, they had mocked me, calling me a workhorse and nothing more. Everything I touched turned a profit, and Willa and the kids never wanted for anything. But they underestimated me. By the time Willa learned the full extent of what I'd done, it was too late. I had sold 3 of our businesses, cleared all our debts, and even sold 2 apartment buildings we owned for a tidy profit. I canceled our joint credit cards, removed my name from all bank accounts, and signed my half of the house over to her. What she didn't know was that I had already taken half of our net worth in cash, slashing her monthly income from $10,000 to 0. Tammy, her sister, felt the sting too. My lawyer froze their assets before they could touch them, leaving them both broke. Later, my lawyer sent Willa a check reimbursing her for a portion of their losses. "Why would you do that?" Willa asked him. "For my client, it was never about the money," he replied. "It was about making a point. He hopes this gives you the chance to start fresh and learn something from all of this." Still, Willa refused to finalize the divorce unless she could speak with me first. But I had no intention of talking to someone who had lied to me for years. Without my support, she was forced to find a job for the first time, quickly realizing how fast money disappears when you're not earning it. I arranged for all my mail to be forwarded to a rented mailbox, which was then sent to my work address. I did this knowing full well that Willa and Tammy thrived on scheming and revenge. It wasn't a question of whether they'd try something, it was only a matter of when. Their family had a way of never letting go of grudges, and my absence only fueled their bitterness. I thought I'd escaped, but now, seeing Tammy walk into that bar, I knew their game wasn't over. I finished my drink and slipped out the back door, avoiding the front in case they were watching. Cutting through an empty lot, I circled around the block to my truck. As I unlocked the door, a man approached me from the shadows. "You're a hard man to track down, Mr. Sam Rhodes," he said. "No kidding," I replied, narrowing my eyes. "How do you know who I am?" "My name's Peter Edwards," he said, extending a hand. "I'm married to your eldest daughter, Connie." "That could be a blessing or a curse," I said dryly. "Depends on whether she takes after her mother." "So, what brings you here?" Peter shifted awkwardly. "I came to find you. There are things that need to be cleared up." Peter showing up out of the blue threw me for a loop. "What exactly needs sorting out?" I asked, motioning for him to follow me. We hopped into our vehicles and drove across town toward a farmhouse. Once inside my office, I pulled out the divorce papers and let him make copies. I didn't feel the need to tell him I didn't actually live there. The place was built for my grandmother Josie, who we all called the Grand Dame, with the hope she'd eventually leave her old house behind. Peter seemed like a decent guy, polite, confident, and clearly educated. But I couldn't shake the thought that he might be part of some scheme Willa and Tammy cooked up. Peter connected to my Wi-Fi and started downloading files onto his laptop. Every crucial document I had was stored there, backed up with a master copy and locked in a safety deposit box. He focused on getting a copy of the sheriff's report Willa signed when she was served the summons. Then, he printed out a damning letter from Willa's attorney to mine, where they acknowledged the agreed division of property, but refused to finalize the divorce unless I showed up in person. As Peter worked, I watched him closely. His expressions told me he was piecing together new information, and much of it didn't align with what he'd been told. "Do you think Connie has any idea about this?" Peter asked, breaking the silence. "That's something you'll have to ask her yourself," I replied. "But let me ask you this. Is Willa really dying of cancer?" Peter raised an eyebrow. "Who told you that?" "Tammy and Seth mentioned it to a bartender earlier today," I said. "But I know it's a lie. Willa's fine. She's in a common-law marriage with her former lawyer and pregnant with their second child." Peter's eyes widened in shock. "She's the one who sent me to find you. She claimed she needed the divorce finalized so she could get remarried," he said, shaking his head. Without hesitation, Peter called Connie and put the phone on speaker. "Connie, did you know your mom lied about the divorce not being finalized?" Peter asked. "What are you talking about?" Connie replied, her voice filled with confusion. "Your mom told us your dad ran off, drained everything he could, and left us with nothing," Connie said. "If it wasn't for our stepdad, we wouldn't have made it." "I'm sending you the legal documents right now," Peter said firmly. "Read through them and call me as soon as you can." While Peter and Connie talked, I grabbed 2 beers, cracked them open, and slid one across the table to him. "Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me?" I asked. "Connie and I have only been married for a couple of years, and we've got a 3-month-old son," Peter said, taking a sip. "I need to understand what's going on before I tell her. Everyone thinks I'm just working on a case." To back up his story, Peter showed me his badge from the Paradise Police Department. I pulled up the department's website on my laptop and confirmed his identity. "It was an accident report that led me to you," Peter explained. "Connie filed a report on your disappearance, which ended up on a national list. Then, the insurance company clued me in about the ruling in your favor. So why keep it from Connie? Depressed. Peter sighed. After digging through your file, it's obvious there's more going on than I was told. For instance, what happened to the $250,000 Willow was supposed to get? And why are so many details being covered up? Sounds like I've been fed a load of lies, too, I said as Peter's phone buzzed. It's my wife, Peter said, switching to speaker mode. Keep it quiet, okay? Hi, honey, Connie said, her voice tense. Where did you get all this? Is it true? Mom's been lying to us for years? Seth and I don't even know the full story of our origins. Karen will be crushed. She defended Dad and got disowned for it. This completely flips everything we've been told, Connie added, her voice shaking. Mom and Aunt Tammy left Dad no choice. They've been controlling everything for years. And what's with the divorce not being finalized? What is she trying to pull? It's all true, Peter said. I tracked down your dad's lawyer's widow out of state. Turns out her husband kept copies of everything. According to the documents, your mom was served with the divorce petition the same day your dad left town. I scribbled a quick note for Peter to have Connie reach out to Josie if she was still around. He gave me a nod of understanding. Pete, we need to find my father, Connie said with urgency. He deserves to be free of all this manipulation. And what happened to the money Mom got? Why did she sell the house if it was hers to keep? The deeper I dig, the more questions I have, Connie continued. And why did she plan to sue him for desertion as soon as she found him? Ask your sister to watch our son a little longer, Peter said. You should talk to Aunt Josie. Maybe she'll share more of what she knows. This stays between us for now, Peter cautioned. There's likely fraud involved, and it's been going on for years. Why has your mom worked so hard to ruin your dad's name? Peter hung up the phone and turned back to me. Do you want to know more about your kids before I leave? He asked. Not yet, I replied, shaking my head. Not until I'm sure you're who you say you are. This could all be another one of their games. Start by looking into my lawyer's sudden death. If Willa plans to sue me, she must think she has an angle. Find out what it is. Peter's face went pale as the weight of the situation hit him. We exchanged numbers, agreeing to keep in touch. After shaking hands, I walked him to the door and watched as he left. Once he was gone, I cleaned up the office, locked up, and took the scenic route home, checking to make sure I wasn't being followed. My life had finally started to come together again, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to revisit the wreckage of the past. But knowing Willa and Tammy, I had to brace myself. They would stop at nothing if money was involved. When I stepped through my front door, 2 little tornadoes came charging at me, grabbing onto my legs. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-old sons, their faces lighting up with joy. Their laughter, along with their mother's smile, reminded me how lucky I was to have them in my life. As I played with my kids, Jod called from the kitchen that dinner was nearly ready. I set the boys down gently and went to wash up. Over dinner, I filled her in on my day. Since closing the store, I couldn't have predicted that my life would take such a turn. When I left Paradise almost 7 years ago, I promised my grandmother, Josie, that I'd stay in touch, and I did. Every Sunday I'd give her a call. About a year and a few months ago, Josie reached out to me for help. Her granddaughter, Jod, needed to get away from a bad marriage and find a safe place to start over. Jod was 10 years younger than me, had no kids, and lived on an army base far from here. I didn't know much about her at first, but I owed Josie a lot, and I was more than happy to help. It took me a week to find a small 2-bedroom apartment in a nearby town and get it partly furnished, which would have been impossible without a few good friends to lend a hand. When I arrived to pick up Jod, she had quit her job, emptied her accounts, and packed her bags. Her husband was about to enlist in the army after his last training exercise. I quietly showed up around 8 p.m. with a rented U-Haul truck. A few neighbors and I worked together to get everything she needed into the truck. In under 4 hours, we were on our way, and I made sure to keep my location a secret for safety. On the drive back, Jod and I started getting to know each other. Later that night, she got a call from Josie. I chuckled when Jod said, "Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me. He's a wild bushman who might look half decent if he cleaned up." The next morning, Josie contacted Jod's attorney to make sure all her legal documents were sent to my FedEx box. Jod warned me her soon-to-be ex could cause some trouble, so I made sure to take precautions to keep her safe. Jod soon took over managing my store, and I was blown away by how good she was at it. She made all the right changes and prioritized the customer's needs. Her charm and personality helped bring in a lot of new clients, and she turned the staff into a smooth-running, problem-free team. Josie had to step in and get a restraining order against Jod's ex, who had been threatening her. He had been dishonorably discharged and moved back to my old hometown, thinking Jod would go back there. To keep prying eyes away, Jod wore a diamond ring, which helped her fit in better in her new life. She took charge of banking and bookkeeping, quickly gaining the community's trust. Jod's honesty and warmth made her a great addition to the town. People would often ask her about the ring, and she'd jokingly reply, "I'm sure you'll figure it out," which led to rumors that she was my future mail-order bride. She started bringing me lunch every Saturday since I often forgot to eat while working, which resulted in me losing a bit of weight. Our relationship blossomed naturally. The town assumed we were a couple, and Josie kept us up to date with everything happening back home. Things got interesting when we learned that Jod's ex had become friendly with Tammy. The day Jod's divorce was finalized, our bond grew even stronger. We celebrated with our friends at the local bar, sharing our first kiss during a slow dance under the low lights. 6 months later, we moved in together. One evening, as the kids were in the bath, I shaved off my beard and mustache, leaving just stubble. The kids watched, fascinated, as I soaped up my face, and theirs, with the bowl and brush Jod had bought me for Christmas. They laughed with joy at the sight of it. Jod walked in just as they were giggling. She couldn't help but laugh too. "It looks like Daddy would look just like you with a clean face," she teased. "Should I cut his hair too?" Both toddlers enthusiastically nodded. I laughed and said, "I'll let the barber handle that on Monday." "No way," Jod said. "I'll do it myself before you change your mind." After getting the kids dried off and dressed for bed, they sat at the kitchen table and watched Jod cut my hair. By the time she finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I told her she did a great job. She sent me to shower off the loose hair while she cleaned up. During this, Josie called. She mentioned that Connie had just left, and Jod thought her grandmother was about to confront the family and get things sorted out. Connie found out that my 3 kids were supposed to receive $600 a month from the child support annuities I'd set up for them, but they'd never gotten a penny. The following week, I found myself the subject of jokes about my new look. People kept asking Jod if she had to blackmail me into joining normal society. Jod just laughed and said, "I promised him he'd bathe at least 3 times a week." Most people got the joke, but some didn't. It was fascinating to see how people changed when they thought they were better than you. We got word that Willa was planning to sue me for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jod and I found it pretty amusing. We figured the lawsuit would only lead to a collection service trying to track me down. When the mailman delivered the news, even he found it funny. His boss and the DA had hired an attorney to represent me, using the situation to piece everything together. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had swiped over $48,000 from each of our kids. They reopened the investigation into my lawyer's sudden death, now treating it as a criminal case. Jod's ex became a key person of interest. If everything added up, Willa and Tammy were looking at 7 to 10 years in prison, and Willa's former lawyer, her common-law husband, could lose his law license. The attorney they hired for me would be paid by Willa and Tammy, and I had to stay out of sight to help build the case. We had a few weeks of calm, and then Josie called Sunday night with the update that paperwork would be filed the next day. She emailed me everything she had gathered over the past 7 years, statements, videotaped conversations, and a list of attorneys for a countersuit. I noticed a $2 million accidental death insurance policy and realized it explained some missing money. Jod discovered that the policy had been purchased just 6 months before I left. We spent the rest of the night sending everything to the DA, sure that this was all a setup to draw me back in. The next morning, Jod reached out to the attorneys we had chosen and sent them everything, along with a retainer. Once Willa's team filed the lawsuit, I planned to serve them before they could serve me. Friday morning, Jod called, and her voice was full of urgency. "Josie's on her way with some guests," she said quickly. "She left last night and stayed at a hotel. Things are really heating up now. We decided to close the store on Saturday and take the long weekend to be with family." By 7 p.m., we saw 2 cars pull into the driveway, a Ford Explorer and a Ford Escape. 4 adults got out of the vehicles. Jod noticed my tension and took my hand. I had hidden my truck in the garage, so no one knew I was home. "Who's with Josie?" Jod asked, her curiosity piqued. "That's Peter, his wife Connie holding their baby, and Karen, my second oldest daughter," I answered. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, squeezing my hand. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, trying to calm my nerves. Jod, holding our youngest son, opened the door, and we all stepped out to greet our guests. As soon as Karen saw me, she burst into tears. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and wrapped Karen in a tight hug. Connie handed her son to Peter and joined us. Seeing my daughters together again was overwhelming. They had both grown into beautiful young women. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said, shaking his hand warmly. After the introductions, Jod served a massive dinner. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes with gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and apple pie for dessert. Once the kids had settled, we all sat down to talk. "Art, is it okay if I call you Dad?" Peter asked, his voice sincere. I nodded. "Then, Dad, I need to tell you something. The DA believes Jod's ex's car was involved in the accident that killed your lawyer. They're going to compare the paint with the current owner's car. If it matches, he's facing manslaughter charges," Peter said. "The fire that destroyed his office the same night is being investigated as arson, and he was seen in the background of the security footage." Peter paused, then added, "Since Willa and her team sealed the divorce papers, they assumed no one could prove what really happened. Now, they filed a lawsuit against you." Jod looked at me and burst into tears. "I always thought you were just being overprotective when we moved here, but now I get it," she said, wiping her eyes. "I thought all those questions you asked my grandmother were too much. But now I understand you needed to know who we were dealing with before making any moves." Josie, always the wise one, chimed in. "Art's always been like that. That's why I called him to save you from your ex. He doesn't ask anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He's going to get rid of those witches for good. My only concern was coming back to paradise. I could tell the women in my life were worried, but I reassured them. Ladies, relax," I said, trying to ease their minds. "I'll be in Peter's hands. If anything happens to me, remember, he's got to answer to Connie, my daughter." Peter nodded, fully aware of the dangers my return posed. Later that evening, Peter and I spoke privately. "The DA believes Jod's ex will make his move as soon as he knows you're back in town," Peter explained. "He'll be furious once he finds out you rescued Jod from that awful marriage. Willa will also find out you're here, through an informant in the city jail. If he gets caught in the act, will he turn on them to save himself?" I asked. "Based on his military background, he's always confessed when caught. He's not a leader, more of a follower. I expect him to fold easily. He stays with Willa and Tammy because he's easily manipulated," Peter replied. I knew I had no choice but to stick with the plan. As we drove into the town, the sign reading "Welcome to City of Refuge, population 34,848, was a sharp reminder of the past I had hoped to leave behind. The city council had decided years ago that federal laws didn't apply here, making it a haven for those in power to do as they pleased. Main Street hadn't changed much, aside from the new paving. My first stop was Bob and Betty's Burger Bar, my old favorite place. It was freshly painted, but otherwise, everything was the same. I parked the U-Haul and walked to the door at around 11:15, just before the lunch rush. As I sat down and picked up the menu, I noticed a few people glancing my way, phones in hand. The server came over with my coffee and asked if I was ready to order. "Is the Wednesday special meatloaf with baked beans and garlic mashed potatoes available?" I asked. "How do you know about that?" the server asked, surprised. "It's only for regulars, not advertised. Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and fried onions with the meatloaf," I said with a smile. The waitress gave me a puzzled look. "Never mind," I said, standing up. "I'll tell him myself." I walked into the kitchen, and Jack looked up at me with a smirk. "You dumbass," he said, laughing. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend." Jack was the son of the original owners, and the place hadn't changed a bit. We'd been friends for years. He asked the kitchen staff to leave us alone for a few minutes so we could talk privately. "Art, you should know, after you left, the wife cut off all ties with Willa and Tammy," Jack said. "She couldn't stand what they did and said about you and the kids." "Jack, a lot's about to go down," I said, getting to the point. "Last night, there was supposed to be an arrest that will set off a chain of events. If everything goes as planned, it'll trigger a series of moves, like dominoes." Jack understood. He nodded slowly. "Tell me more later, all right? Too many ears in here right now," he said, lowering his voice. As we were talking, I saw my little sister, Sasha, pull into the parking lot. She hadn't seen me yet, so I stood up and waved at her. "Sasha," I called out as she walked inside. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and then she froze in place. It didn't take long for her to run over and hug me tightly. "You're home," she whispered. Her voice choked with emotion. It took her a few moments to regain composure. Jack told the kitchen staff to give us some space, and Sasha immediately picked up on the fact that something serious was going on. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "No, and it's best if we keep it that way for a few days," I replied, trying to ease her worries. "Are you back because Willa was arrested last night?" Sasha asked. "Yes, and things are only going to get worse before they get better," I said, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Once I'm settled, I'll be under police protection. The DA's been looking into my lawyer's sudden death, and they now think it's linked to the arson at his office." Both Jack and Sasha looked at me, stunned. The district attorney had already started making waves by reopening some of the unsolved cases from years ago. "You're the decoy," Jack said, his voice low. "If everything pans out, the arson, liquidation, and other crimes will be resolved soon," I replied. "My return to town will upset everything, and Willa's arrest will disrupt their plan." "Can you tell me what this is all about?" Jack asked. "A $2 million insurance policy on me," I said flatly, "with double indemnity if I die in an accident." Sasha and Jack stood there for a moment, taking in the full weight of what I had just revealed. "A $2 million insurance policy?" Sasha finally said, her voice a mix of disbelief and confusion. "And they were trying to cash in on it by—" Her voice trailed off as the realization hit her. "Exactly," I answered grimly. "Their plan was to make it look like an accident, but things didn't go as smoothly as they'd hoped once I left." As we walked out of the restaurant, Tammy's car suddenly pulled up beside us. Her unexpected appearance put Sasha on edge. "Where are you staying?" Sasha whispered to me, her voice laced with concern. "At Josie's house for now," I replied. "I'm in the process of moving her things to her new place. She wants to be as far away from all this as possible." Tammy got out of her car and walked toward us. Art, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us, she said bluntly. The district attorney is planning to charge Willa in the next 48 hours. If you don't lift the lien on her assets, we won't be able to bail her out. Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that, I said calmly. Willa filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, abandonment of the child, and back child support. Until the court rules on her claims, everything stays as it is. Tammy's expression darkened. You can't be serious. How are we supposed to get her out with no assets? She demanded. Well, maybe your father could help, I suggested, keeping my tone neutral. He could put up his house as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters. Tammy's face twisted with anger, and she stormed back to her car. Sasha watched her leave, shaking her head. You know their father doesn't have anything to do with them anymore, right? Sasha said. Not since he found out about Seth's real parentage. He says they've turned out just like their mother. A bitter smile crossed my face. Tammy and Willa had burned so many bridges that even their own family wanted nothing to do with them. Once Tammy drove off, I climbed back into the U-Haul and headed for Josie's house. I stopped to grab packing materials along the way, knowing I had a long night ahead of me. By 3 p.m., I was backing into Josie's driveway, maneuvering the truck carefully toward the garage door. As I stepped out of the truck, I noticed something odd. The curtains in the house were closed, even though Josie had mentioned she'd left them open. I texted Peter to ask if anyone from his team had closed the curtains. He replied that the officer stationed at the house may have done it for security purposes. Feeling a little more at ease, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Mr. Ryan, a police officer greeted me, holding out a cell phone. Peter Edwards wants to speak with you. Hi, Peter, I said, picking up the phone. It looks like those who need to know are fully aware you're back, Peter said. Tammy talked to you today, didn't she? She did, I confirmed. She wanted me to lift the lien on their assets, but I told her no. That's what I figured. Willa told Tammy to let Brad, Jod's ex, know where you are. She thinks that'll make him act, Peter explained. Brad? I asked, my voice tightening. Yeah, our informant, who got arrested today, overheard Willa telling Tammy you're staying at Josie's house. She gave Brad your location, hoping he'll take care of things, Peter said. I gripped the phone tighter. Do you think he'll actually try something? It's highly likely. He's been easily manipulated by Willa and Tammy in the past, Peter said. I exhaled, realizing just how tangled I was in their web. Let me know if anything changes. I'm going to start packing Josie's things tonight. Be careful, Peter warned before hanging up. The next few hours were spent moving through the house, packing boxes and getting everything in order. At 6:30 p.m., the pizza I had ordered arrived. When the delivery driver knocked, I casually told him I was helping a friend move. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I heard a sound at the front door. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. I quietly made my way to the kitchen, staying out of sight, and grabbed a heavy wrench from the counter. A figure stepped inside, holding a tire iron in one hand and a pistol tucked in his waistband. It was Brad. He walked into the kitchen, his gaze narrowing when he spotted me sitting at the table, sipping my coffee. Hey, Art, Brad said, his voice tight. Willa and Tammy say hi. I'm here to find out where Jod is. You're going to tell me. Sorry, Brad, I said calmly, taking another sip of coffee. I can't do that. You don't have a choice, he growled, pulling the pistol from his waistband and pointing it at me. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone steady. Before you pull that trigger, ask yourself one thing. How much were you promised from the insurance payout? Brad furrowed his brow. What do you mean? I mean the $4 million accidental death policy Willa and Tammy took out on me, I said, holding his gaze. How much did they tell you it was worth? Brad's face went pale. They said it was $750,000, he muttered. I laughed bitterly. They lied to you, Brad. They've been lying to everyone. And when you've outlived your usefulness, they'll get rid of you too. Just like they tried to do with me. For a moment, Brad hesitated, lowering the gun slightly. What are you saying? He asked, confusion creeping into his voice. I'm saying you're just a pawn in their game, I said, my voice firm. They've used you to do their dirty work, but when you're no longer needed, you're expendable. If you're smart, you'll turn yourself in and tell the authorities everything. Brad's hand trembled as he processed my words. Finally, he set the gun on the table. Call the police, he said softly. I nodded and dialed Peter's number. By the time the officers arrived, Brad had confessed everything. He admitted to being coerced into the arson that killed my lawyer and to planning an attack on me under Willa's orders. As the officers led Brad away, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and the trap was set. The night grew quieter after Brad's arrest, though my mind wouldn't settle. I kept running through the events of the night, wondering what the next steps would be. Sleep didn't come easy, as I braced myself for the fallout. By morning, I called Jack for help securing the house. Within the hour, he sent over a contractor to replace the damaged front door, install new trim, and add a reinforced lock for extra security. While the repairs were underway, Connie and Jod arrived. Jod stepped out of the car, her face pale, clearly filled with worry. The moment she saw me, tears welled up in her eyes. She rushed toward me, and I caught her in an embrace. Why didn't you tell me? Jod's voice trembled. Why didn't you call me? It was late, almost 2 a.m, I explained. By the time the police cleared out, I figured I'd call you today instead. You didn't think I'd want to know? After everything we've been through. Jod pulled back, her eyes searching mine for answers. I'm sorry, I said, my voice sincere. I'll never keep something like this from you again. Once the contractor finished the work and we got Jod's luggage settled, we locked up the house and decided to head to Jack's restaurant for breakfast. We were meeting Sasha, Karen, and my parents there. When we arrived, Jack's staff had to push 2 tables together to fit everyone. My family greeted Jod warmly, and it felt surreal to have everyone together like this. We dug into breakfast, with Jack bringing out generous portions of his best dishes. My parents were over the moon when they found out about my 2 sons, Carson and Hunter, named after their grandfathers. Jod shared photos from her phone, and my daughters filled my parents in on how we had reconnected over the years. Peter arrived midway through the meal, looking worn out but determined. Willa and Tammy are both in custody, Peter said as he joined us at the table. Brad has confessed to everything, including his involvement in the arson and your lawyer's death. He's fully cooperating. What charges are they facing? I asked, my voice steady despite the weight of the news. 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and fraud, Peter replied. The DA is also fast-tracking your divorce proceedings. Jod's eyes widened with surprise. Does that mean? Yes, Peter answered, smiling. Your marriage can finally be official. For a brief moment, I was taken aback. I hadn't expected it to happen this quickly. Well then, I said, recovering from the shock. I guess I'll have to buy you a proper engagement ring, Jod. Laughter and congratulations filled the room. Jod, overwhelmed with emotion, covered her face with her hands, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Later, we went to City Hall to pick up the marriage license. Jod found out she could fit into Connie's wedding dress, and soon, everything began to fall into place for the ceremony. Jack agreed to be my best man, Karen became Jod's maid of honor, and the DA himself offered to officiate. I picked out a 3-ring engagement set, making sure it was something Jod would love. I kept it hidden until the right moment came. That evening, back at my parents' house, the living room was filled with family and laughter. After dinner, I knelt in front of Jod, holding the ring set in my hands. "Will you make me the happiest man alive and officially become my wife?" I asked, my heart pounding. Jod gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "Yes." Cheers erupted around the room, and my parents toasted our engagement with glasses of sparkling cider. Later that night, Peter and I had a quiet conversation away from the celebration. "What's the next step?" I asked. "Now that Brad is cooperating, we'll build an airtight case against Willa and Tammy," Peter said. "Their father has also come forward with information about financial misconduct they committed while managing the family estate." "What about Willa's common-law husband?" I asked. "He'll likely be disbarred, but there's no direct link to the criminal activities. He'll be responsible for raising their 2 children," Peter answered. "That sounds like justice to me," I said, nodding. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. On Sunday afternoon, surrounded by family and friends in my parents' backyard, Jod and I exchanged vows. The DA performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, and even Willa and Tammy's estranged father attended, offering his support. After the ceremony, he handed me an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," he said, his voice low. "It's your early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." Inside was a promissory note for $100,000, with a handwritten message. "Thank you for helping to fix karma. I always suspected Willa and Tammy were involved in their mother's death. Watching them face justice will be a relief for all of us." Jod slipped the note into her purse without saying anything, simply nodding in understanding. The wedding celebration stretched late into the night. Family members shared stories, old friends caught up, and the kids played beneath the twinkling lights my parents had hung across the yard. It was one of those rare moments of pure joy, free from the weight of everything that had happened before. The following morning, as we were getting ready to head home, I hugged my daughters tightly. "I'll visit more often," I promised them. "This time, I'm not disappearing." Before we left, Jod handed me the envelope from Willa and Tammy's father. Inside, along with the promissory note, was a handwritten list detailing hidden assets and accounts they'd been hiding for years. It was a treasure chest of information that would help strengthen the case against them. The drive home was peaceful. Carson and Hunter were eager to see us, and Jod's grandmother, Josie, was over the moon about moving into her new home. After we settled her in, we spent the evening talking about how far we'd come. The next few weeks brought a constant stream of updates from Peter. Brad's testimony had proven to be incredibly valuable, peeling back layer after layer of deceit and criminal behavior. Willa and Tammy were now facing even more charges, embezzlement and conspiracy, on top of the ones already filed. The most shocking discovery came when investigators unearthed Willa and Tammy's involvement in the death of their own mother. Evidence showed financial motives tied to an inheritance dispute, sealing their fate even further. One evening, Peter called with good news. "The DA's got enough evidence to lock them up for multiple charges," he said. "They won't be getting out anytime soon." "What about Brad?" I asked. "He'll serve time for manslaughter and arson," Peter replied. "But his cooperation got him a reduced sentence. He also forfeited any claim to Jod's assets, so she's completely free of him now." With the legal battles behind us, Jod and I finally made plans for our long-awaited honeymoon. True to her word, Jod wanted it to be a family trip, so we organized a week in Florida followed by another week in California. We visited Disney with the kids, making new memories that helped us heal from the scars of the past. When we returned home, we found letters from my daughters waiting for us. Karen and Connie had started making strides to rebuild their lives, inspired by the strength they had witnessed in Jod and me. Connie's letter read, "Dad, for years I believed Mom's lies, but now I know the truth. You were the one constant in our lives, even when we didn't see it. Thank you for never giving up on us." Karen's letter was shorter but just as meaningful. "Dad, Seeing you so happy with Jod gives me hope that I can find my own happiness. Thank you for coming back into our lives. Life settled back into a peaceful rhythm. The store thrived under Jod's leadership, and our boys grew into curious, lively kids who loved both their mother and me. Josie became an integral part of our home, always ready with stories and wisdom she collected over the years. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jod rested her head on my shoulder. "We've come so far," she said softly. "We really have," I replied. "And I wouldn't change a thing. Not even the tough parts, they got us here." As the stars started to fill the sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The past no longer cast a shadow over me. Willa and Tammy's plans had fallen apart, justice had been served, and my family was whole again. This new chapter wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. Together, we had built a life full of love, resilience, and hope for the future.